Rain fell in sheets against the old wooden house, the wind howling like a beast outside, rattling the windows and shaking the door on its hinges. The man sat quietly by the dim glow of a lantern, the storm outside louder than his thoughts, when a sharp knock echoed through the night. He frowned, startled, for no one ever came to his doorstep at such an hour, especially not in weather like this. Rising slowly, he moved toward the door, his steps heavy on the creaking floor, his hand hesitating on the handle as the knock came again. Louder this time, urgent and desperate. With a deep breath, he pulled the door open, and there she stood. She was small, fragile, her body drenched from the rain, shivering violently. Her skin was pale but glowed faintly in the stormlight, her eyes wide and shimmering like no human eyes he had ever seen, glowing softly with a strange color that unsettled him. She looked up at him with trembling lips and whispered a single plea, "Please, shelter." Her voice was soft, broken, carrying a weight that pressed into his chest. For a long moment he only stared, his mind racing, his instinct screaming that something was not right, that she was not like him, not like anyone he had ever met. Yet there was something in her gaze, something raw and desperate, that made him step aside. He opened the door wider and let her in. The warmth of the room wrapped around her as she crossed the threshold, but the storm seemed to follow, a chill sweeping through the air as though she carried the night inside her. She stood silently just past the door, dripping water onto the floor, her thin hands clutching at her arms, her shoulders shaking. He watched her closely, uneasy, his heart beating faster than it should, and asked her quietly who she was and why she was here. She did not answer directly, only whispered again that she needed shelter, that she would leave when the storm passed. Her words were simple, but her trembling voice carried something hidden, something she did not want to say. He guided her to a chair by the lantern, fetching a blanket from the small shelf. As he draped it around her shoulders, she flinched at his touch, her glowing eyes flicking up to meet his, wide and almost fearful. He pulled back slowly, confused, studying her face more closely now. The faint lines of her skin shimmered under the lantern's light, patterns that seemed too perfect, too delicate, as if painted by something beyond human. Her hair clung to her cheeks, wet and heavy, but even in its mess it shone faintly, carrying colors the firelight could not explain. She looked fragile, helpless, but something about her presence made the air feel heavy, charged, dangerous. The man sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. He tried to calm his thoughts, tried to tell himself she was just a stranger, just a girl lost in the storm. But deep down he knew better. No human eyes glowed like hers, no human skin shimmered as if lit from within. He asked her again, more firmly this time, who she was. She looked at him for a long moment, silent, her lips parting as if to answer, then closing again. Instead, she whispered only one word, safe. That was all she wanted, she said, to feel safe for just a while. His chest tightened at her voice, at the quiet desperation in her tone. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face, torn between suspicion and pity. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but he could not bring himself to turn her out into the storm. The minutes passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of the lantern flame and the relentless pounding of rain against the house. Yet the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, filled with tension, filled with the unspoken truth that she was not what she seemed. As the storm raged outside, he noticed the way her hands gripped the blanket too tightly, the way her shoulders rose and fell with uneven breaths, the way her glowing eyes darted now and then toward the window, as though she feared something was out there. His unease grew. If she had come to his door by accident, why did she look so afraid? If she only wanted shelter, why did it feel as though she was hiding from something far worse than the storm? The lantern flickered suddenly, shadows dancing across the walls, and she stiffened instantly, her body trembling beneath the blanket. Her glowing eyes snapped toward the door, then back to him, and for the first time, he saw not just fear in her gaze but warning. His throat went dry as the realization settled over him. She had not come to his house by chance. She had come because she was running, and whatever she was running from might not be far behind. He shifted uneasily in his chair, his hand brushing against the wood of the table as if for comfort. She noticed his movement, her lips parting slightly as though she wanted to speak, to confess, but she only shook her head and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. The silence between them thickened, the storm outside a steady roar, and though the walls of the house stood firm, he felt exposed, as if danger pressed against them from every side. As the minutes passed, his heart would not calm, his instincts whispering that the night had changed forever. The storm had brought something to his doorstep, something fragile yet dangerous, something that begged for safety but carried secrets too deep to trust. He sat there watching her, and she sat trembling by the lantern, and though no more words were spoken, the truth was clear. She had asked only for shelter, but already the air was filled with unease, with questions that had no answers. And in that quiet, in that storm, he realized that letting her in might have been the first step into a danger he could not yet see. The storm carried on through the night, the sound of rain hammering against the roof like endless drums, the wind screaming as if something alive circled the house, searching for a way inside. The man barely slept, his eyes heavy but his mind sharp, always returning to the girl sitting quietly near the lantern. She had not moved much, her slim frame wrapped tightly in the blanket, her glowing eyes lowered to the floor as if she dared not look at him again. There was something unsettling about her stillness. The way she seemed to listen more to the storm than to the sound of his words. He tried to tell himself she was simply afraid, simply lost, but every time his gaze met hers, a wave of unease rippled through him. When dawn finally broke, the rain slowed to a steady drizzle, gray light spilling into the room through the window. The man rose and began to prepare a simple meal. The girl shifted, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, her skin still damp, her hair clinging to her face. He set bread and water on the table, then turned toward her, offering her food with a quiet gesture. She lifted her head slowly, her glowing eyes flashing faintly in the morning light. Her lips parted, and for a moment it seemed as though she would speak, but instead she only reached out and took the food with careful hands. She ate in silence, each movement precise and controlled, as though she were not used to such things. He sat opposite her, watching closely, trying to understand. Finally he asked her again, more gently this time, who she was and what she was running from. She froze, the piece of bread halfway to her mouth, and lowered it slowly. Her glowing eyes flicked toward the window, then back to him, and he saw her jaw tighten. She whispered that she could not tell him, that it was safer if he did not know. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying a weight that made his stomach twist. She looked as though she wanted to say more, but the words would not come. The man leaned back in his chair, his hand resting on the table, his eyes fixed on her. Her skin still carried that strange faint shimmer, as if lit from within, and now he noticed more. Small patterns hidden beneath her skin, pulsing faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat. He frowned, his unease deepening, and asked her if she was even human. She flinched at his words, her glowing eyes snapping up to meet his, wide with shock. For a moment, the silence was crushing, her lips trembling as though she wanted to deny it. But finally she lowered her gaze and whispered the truth. She was not. The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. He swallowed hard, his heart racing, but he did not move from his chair. He asked her what she wanted from him, why she had come to his door. She lifted her head slowly, her expression torn between fear and hope, and whispered that she had only wanted safety, only wanted a place where she could hide for a little while. She promised she would leave once it was safe, promised she would not harm him. But her voice shook as she said it, and he could not tell if it was because of fear of him or fear of something else. The hours passed slowly. She remained near the lantern, her glowing eyes watching the window as though expecting something to appear at any moment. Sometimes she would flinch at the sound of wind rattling the shutters, sometimes her body would tense as if ready to flee. The man tried to ignore it, tried to tell himself she was only frightened, but he began to notice more. Her skin grew warmer as the day went on, the faint patterns beneath her flesh glowing brighter in moments when she thought he wasn't watching. Once, when he brushed too close as he set down another cup of water, her hand twitched violently, and her eyes flashed with an intensity that made him freeze in place. He asked her again if she was in danger, if something was hunting her. She shook her head quickly, too quickly, whispering that it was not like that. But her voice was unsteady, and he could hear the lie within it. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, turning her glowing eyes away from him, whispering that she should never have come, that it was a mistake. Yet even as she said it, she did not rise, did not leave. She stayed in his home, trembling, her silence louder than any storm. That night, when the rain returned in heavy sheets, the man woke suddenly to a sound in the house. His eyes opened to see her standing by the window, her blanket fallen to the floor, her thin figure outlined by the faint silver glow of her skin. Her hands were pressed against the glass, her breathing sharp and quick, her glowing eyes staring into the darkness outside. He rose carefully, his voice low as he asked her what she was doing. She turned her head slowly, her expression filled with conflict, her lips trembling. She whispered that it was starting, that she could not stop it. The man frowned, his chest tightening at her words, asking her what she meant. She only shook her head, backing away from the window, her hands clutching her chest as her body shook violently. Her glowing eyes flashed brighter, her skin shimmering in the dark, and she whispered again that she should never have come. Her voice broke with pain, and he realized with growing dread that the storm outside was not the only danger pressing against his house. Something inside her was awakening, something she could not control, and though she had asked only for shelter, he could see the truth written across her trembling body. She carried secrets darker than she could admit, and those secrets had already begun to surface. He stood frozen, staring at her as she collapsed back into the chair, covering her face with trembling hands. She whispered something he could barely hear, words half-broken, but they chilled him all the same. "It's not the storm you should fear. It's me." The storm eased the next morning, leaving behind gray skies and heavy mist clinging to the ground, but inside the house the tension did not lift. The man rose early, his body heavy with lack of sleep, and found the alien girl still sitting where she had been the night before, her blanket wrapped tightly around her, her glowing eyes staring at the cold ashes in the fireplace. She looked fragile, almost childlike in her silence, but he could not forget the way her skin had burned faintly with light, the way her trembling voice had warned him that it was not the storm he should fear. That sentence echoed in his head with every breath, making his chest tighten. He busied himself with small chores, feeding the fire, setting water to boil, but his eyes kept drifting back to her, watching the way she shifted uncomfortably, the way her breathing quickened at times as if she were fighting something inside. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. The girl avoided his questions now, answering only with short words, her gaze fixed anywhere but his. Yet he noticed small changes that unsettled him deeply. Her skin seemed warmer to the touch whenever he brushed near her. Her glowing eyes lingered too long when she thought he wasn't watching, and sometimes she would tense sharply as if suppressing an instinct she didn't want to reveal. Once, while pouring water into her cup, his hand accidentally brushed hers. She flinched as if burned, her glowing eyes flashing brighter for a moment, and she pulled her hand back so quickly that the cup spilled onto the floor. He crouched to clean it, but his gaze lingered on her trembling fingers, and a cold truth began to creep into his thoughts. She wasn't simply hiding, something inside her was changing. By evening, he could no longer ignore it. He sat across from her at the table, his voice low but firm, asking her to tell him what was happening. She stared at him for a long moment, her glowing eyes glimmering with conflict, and then she shook her head. "You don't want to know," she whispered. Her voice cracked as if the words cost her pain. He leaned forward, his hands pressed against the table, his voice steady as he told her that the danger in not knowing was worse than the truth. She bit her lip, her hands gripping the blanket tighter, and for a brief second he thought she would finally tell him. But instead, her eyes filled with fear, and she whispered that it was too late already. That night, as the wind rattled faintly against the shutters, the man woke to a sound in the house again. He turned his head toward the chair by the lantern, but it was empty. Rising quietly, he followed the faint glow through the narrow hallway until he saw her near the door, her hand hovering over the lock, her glowing eyes shining brightly in the dark. Her body trembled violently, and her skin shimmered faintly as if fire burned beneath her flesh. He stepped closer, his voice firm but calm, asking her where she was going. She turned sharply, her face pale but her eyes burning with something he had never seen before, hunger, fear, and longing all tangled together. She whispered that she had to leave, that if she stayed she would put him in danger. He shook his head, his jaw tight, telling her that she had come here for shelter and that he would not let her walk out into the storm of whatever she feared. Her body shook harder, her lips trembling as she whispered that it wasn't the outside world that was dangerous, it was her. His heart pounded at her words, but he did not move away. Instead, he stepped closer, placing himself between her and the door, his eyes steady on hers. Her breath came sharp and uneven, and he could see the way her glowing eyes flickered wildly, the way her hands clenched as though fighting the urge to reach for him. For a moment, silence filled the air, heavy and suffocating. Then she staggered back, her hands pressed against her chest, and she whispered in a voice breaking with despair that her body was betraying her. He froze, his mind racing, trying to understand, but her words were fractured, spilling out in pieces, about a cycle, about instincts she could not control, about a season her kind endured that no human could imagine. She stopped herself suddenly, clamping her lips shut, shaking her head violently as if she had said too much. He stood still, his throat dry, realizing with growing dread that whatever she was hiding was not something small, not something harmless. It was something that could consume them both. The lantern flickered suddenly, shadows stretching across the walls, and she gasped, clutching at her arms. Her glowing eyes lifted to his, filled with a plea she could not speak, and in that instant he understood something without her words. She had not come to him by chance. She had come because she could not fight this alone, because she was afraid of what she would become. He took a step closer, his voice softer now, telling her that whatever she was facing, she did not have to face it alone. Her eyes widened at his words, her lips parting in shock, and for a moment he thought she might break, might tell him everything. But then she turned sharply, pulling the blanket tighter, and whispered in a trembling voice, "You'll regret letting me in." The man stood there long after she turned away, his chest heavy with unease, his heart racing with questions that had no answers. He returned to his bed, but sleep never came. In the silence of the night, with her trembling breaths filling the room, he realized the truth. The girl he had sheltered carried a secret that was not only tearing her apart but pulling him into a danger far greater than the storm outside. And whatever it was getting closer with every hour. The morning came, but the man felt no relief when sunlight pushed through the gray clouds. Instead of comfort, it brought a strange stillness to the air, a silence too heavy for the day after a storm. He moved quietly around the house, setting wood into the fireplace, boiling water, trying to act as though life was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. His guest, the alien girl he had taken in, sat motionless near the window, her blanket slipping from her shoulders, her glowing eyes staring into nothing. She had hardly spoken since the night before, and her silence pressed on him like a weight. He watched her out of the corner of his eye, noticing the way her hands shook slightly, the way her breathing came sharp and uneven, as though something inside her fought for control. When he finally asked if she was all right, she didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter, curling into herself as though she was afraid of his voice. His chest tightened at the sight, confusion and fear twisting together inside him. He had given her shelter, he had asked for no answers, yet he felt as though he had already stepped into something far greater than he understood. He tried again, his voice low but steady, asking if she was sick, if she needed help. She turned her glowing eyes toward him then, and what he saw made his blood run cold. There was no simple fear in her gaze now, no simple plea for safety. There was hunger, raw and unmasked, mixed with despair. She opened her lips slightly, as if to speak, but then closed them again, shaking her head hard as though refusing herself the words. As the day stretched on, her behavior grew stranger. At times she would pace the floor, her steps uneven, her hands clenching and unclenching as though restless energy burned through her. Other times she sat curled against the wall, trembling violently, her skin glowing faintly with patterns that shifted beneath the surface. When he tried to approach, she snapped her head toward him, her glowing eyes blazing too bright, and begged him not to come closer. Her voice was sharp, broken, carrying fear not for herself but for him. The man stopped where he stood, his chest heavy, his heart racing. Whatever was happening inside her, She was fighting it with everything she had, but she was losing. By evening, the warning signs could no longer be ignored. She collapsed suddenly near the fireplace, her body racked with shivers, her hands digging into the floorboards as if to anchor herself. He rushed to her side, reaching out instinctively, but she twisted sharply, her glowing eyes flaring bright, her voice breaking as she shouted for him not to touch her. He froze, his hands inches away, staring at her as she gasped for breath. Sweat glistened on her pale skin, and the patterns beneath it pulsed violently, glowing brighter than ever. She pressed her hands to her chest, curling into herself, whispering words in a language he could not understand, each one spilling from her lips with pain. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears that shimmered against their unnatural glow. Her lips trembled as she whispered the truth, or at least a piece of it. She said her kind carried a cycle, something that came like a season, a force they could not control. She whispered that it was starting, that it had already taken hold of her body. Her voice cracked with despair as she begged him to stay away, begged him not to be near her, because if he did, it would consume them both. Her words struck him harder than the storm outside ever could. He stared at her, his throat dry, his heart heavy with fear and pity all at once. He wanted to ask more, wanted to demand answers, but the look in her eyes silenced him. It was not a look of defiance or secrecy. It was a look of desperation, of someone terrified of themselves. She lowered her head, her hair falling across her face, her hands trembling against the floor. The firelight flickered across her features, casting shadows that made her look less human, more like the creature she had confessed to be. But even then, he could not see only a monster. He saw the fear, the pain, the struggle. And that frightened him most of all, because fear of the unknown was easier than pity for it. The night deepened, and the house grew colder despite the fire. The man stayed awake, sitting nearby, watching her as she shifted in restless sleep, her body twitching, her lips moving in whispers of words he could not understand. Sometimes her glowing eyes would flash open suddenly, staring at the ceiling as though she were fighting some invisible force. Other times she would clutch at her arms, her breathing sharp and ragged, until it faded into silence again. He did not sleep. He could not. Each passing moment filled him with the same question. What would happen when she could no longer resist? In the silence of the early hours, she woke again. Her eyes found his immediately, glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at him with a gaze so heavy it seemed to pierce through him, her lips trembling as she whispered four words that sent a chill through his blood. You should run now. But he did not move. He sat there, his body tense but his eyes steady on hers. She shook her head, tears spilling down her pale cheeks, whispering again that he should leave before it was too late. Her voice cracked with fear, but beneath it there was something else, pleading, not for her safety, but for his. The man swallowed hard, his chest tight, but still he did not move. He whispered back that he had given her shelter, and he would not abandon her now. Her glowing eyes widened at his words, her breath catching, and for a moment her body stilled. But then the glow in her skin brightened suddenly, the strange patterns shifting violently, and she gasped in pain, collapsing against the floor. The man rushed forward without thinking, catching her before she struck the ground. Her body burned against his hands, hotter than any fever, trembling as though every muscle fought to escape itself. She looked up at him through blurred eyes, her lips forming a whisper that broke his heart. I warned you. And in that moment he understood. The danger was no longer outside, no longer something chasing her through the storm. The danger was inside her, awakening with every breath, and he had let it into his house. The house was quiet, but the silence inside it was heavier than thunder. The man sat near the alien girl, watching as she struggled to breathe, her body trembling under the weight of whatever force consumed her. The firelight flickered across her skin, highlighting the strange glowing patterns that pulsed beneath it like veins of living light. He wanted to reach for her, wanted to steady her, but her earlier warnings echoed in his mind. It isn't the storm you should fear, it's me. His chest felt tight as he realized that whatever secret she had hidden since the night she arrived was now clawing its way to the surface. Her glowing eyes flicked open suddenly, meeting his. They were brighter than before, too bright, filled with both fear and something deeper, something primal. She whispered his name, though he was sure he had never told her, and the sound of it from her lips made his blood run cold. He asked her how she knew, but she only shook her head weakly, her lips trembling as though her words would burn her if spoken. He pressed her, his voice harder now, demanding the truth. For a long moment, she lay silent, her chest rising and falling in sharp, painful breaths. Then, with tears glowing faintly in her eyes, she finally broke. She told him of her people, of the cycle that returned to them like the turning of seasons, unavoidable and unstoppable. She said it was their mating season, a time when instincts overtook reason, when hunger drowned out choice. Her voice cracked as she admitted she had not come to his door by accident. She had come because she was afraid of what she would do, afraid of hurting others, afraid of herself. She thought if she hid away, if she buried herself far from her kind, far from anyone, she could endure it alone. But fate had brought her to him instead, and now he was trapped in it with her. The man's heart pounded as her words sank in. His hands clenched tightly at his sides, his mind spinning. Mating season. The phrase carried a weight he could not fully grasp, but he understood enough to feel the danger pulsing in the air between them. He looked at her trembling body, at the glow racing under her skin, at the way her glowing eyes flickered between fear and longing, and he knew this was no sickness, no simple weakness. This was something far greater, something that threatened to consume them both. She turned her head away from him, her tears dripping onto the blanket as she whispered that he should have never opened the door, that his kindness had doomed him. She begged him to leave, to run before it was too late, but her voice carried no hope. It was as if she already knew he would not. And he didn't. His chest burned with fear, yes, but also with something else. Pity, anger at her pain, and a strange pull he could not explain. She was not only a creature of danger, she was also someone who had chosen to hide, to protect others from herself. That truth gnawed at him, breaking the wall of fear brick by brick. He asked her if there was a way to stop it. Her laugh came weak and bitter, her voice breaking as she said no. There was no stopping it, only surviving it. Her kind had rituals, traditions, ways to endure the season, but she had abandoned them when she fled. Alone, the season would tear her apart. With someone near, she choked on her words, unable to finish. But he understood. The danger was not only to her but to him. The hunger in her eyes, the tremor in her body, it all told him what she dared not say. The hours dragged on, the fire burning low. He stayed near her, refusing to leave even when she begged again. She tried to crawl away from him, to press herself against the far wall, her glowing eyes wet with shame. She told him she did not want to hurt him, did not want to drag him into something he could not escape. But every time her body shook violently, every time she gasped for breath, he moved closer, unable to stand by and watch. His hands hovered near her, torn between obeying her pleas and steadying her before she collapsed completely. At one point, her strength gave out, and she fell forward into his arms. Her body was burning, hotter than any fever, her heartbeat racing like a drum inside her chest. He froze, afraid to hold her, but she gripped his shirt tightly, her glowing eyes staring into his with raw desperation. Her voice was low, broken, almost like a growl, as she whispered that it was too late to run, too late to fight. The season was here, and he was the one caught in its path. His throat went dry, his chest tight, but he steadied her, his voice calm though his heart raced. He told her he would not abandon her, that if she had come to his house it was for a reason, and maybe that reason was not only fear but trust. She blinked at him, her glowing eyes softening for a moment, her trembling lips parting in shock at his words. Then she closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, whispering that his kindness was the very thing that would destroy him. The night deepened once more, the storm outside distant now, but the real storm was inside the small house, in the fragile bond between a man and an alien girl who had carried a secret too heavy to keep hidden. The dangerous truth was out, and though neither of them said it aloud, both knew the same thing. The Real fight was only beginning. The hours after her confession dragged on like an endless weight, filling the house with silence so thick it pressed into his chest. The man sat close by, his eyes fixed on the alien girl as she lay trembling beneath the blanket, her body glowing faintly in the dim light. She had told him the truth, or at least enough of it. Her people's cycle was not sickness but instinct, not choice but command, a season when desire turned into a force stronger than will. He replayed her words again and again in his mind, every whisper of her warning echoing louder. If you stay, it will consume you too. But still he did not move. Her breathing came uneven, sometimes shallow, sometimes sharp, as if she was struggling against something invisible pressing down on her. Sweat glistened on her skin, her glowing patterns pulsing brighter with every hour. He had never seen anything like it, beautiful and terrifying all at once. He wanted to believe she could endure it, that sheer strength might let her survive. But each time she gasped, each time her fingers clenched the blanket hard enough to tear it, he realized she was losing. At last, she spoke, her voice breaking the silence. "You should bind me," she whispered, her glowing eyes flicking toward him with shame. "Chain me. Lock me away. Don't let me touch you." Her words were ragged, trembling with fear, and the plea in them chilled him more than any storm. He stared at her, his jaw tight, unable to answer. The thought of chaining her like a prisoner clawed at him, but the terror in her eyes told him she believed it was the only way. He shook his head slowly, his voice steady but soft. "I won't treat you like that. You came here for shelter. I won't turn this place into a cage." Her glowing eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief, then twisting with pain. "You don't understand," she whispered, clutching her chest as her body shuddered violently. "It's not me you should fear, it's what I will become. If you stay too close, I won't stop." Her voice cracked on the last word, breaking into a sob she tried to hide behind trembling hands. The man rose from his chair, pacing slowly across the small room. His heart pounded, his mind racing through choices that all felt impossible. She was not lying. He could see it in every tremor of her body, every flicker of fear in her glowing eyes. Yet he could not bring himself to walk away, to leave her alone in that agony. He stopped at the fireplace, staring into the flames, and whispered almost to himself, "You asked for safety. I won't abandon you now." Behind him, she let out a sound between a sob and a laugh, bitter and broken. "Your kindness will destroy you," she whispered. But when he turned, he saw something else in her face, a crack in her fear, a glimmer of gratitude buried beneath her terror. The night deepened, and with it her struggle. At times she curled tightly on the floor, her skin glowing so brightly it painted the walls with faint light. At other times she staggered to her feet, pacing the room in restless circles, her glowing eyes darting toward him, then away, as if fighting some inner war. The man kept his distance when she begged for space, but whenever she stumbled, whenever her body faltered, he was there to catch her. Each time his hands touched her burning skin, she cried out in despair, whispering that he should not, could not, but she never pulled away fast enough. Once, near midnight, she collapsed entirely, her body racked with violent tremors. He rushed to her side, lifting her carefully, his arms steady though his chest burned with fear. She clung to him then, her fingers gripping his shirt desperately, her glowing eyes staring into his with raw hunger and pain. "Do you see now?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "Do you see what I am? This is why I begged you to run." Her body shook against him, and he could feel the fire inside her like heat radiating through every breath. Yet he only held her tighter, whispering that he would not run, no matter what came. Her tears spilled freely at his words, her body trembling harder, torn between longing and resistance. She pressed her forehead against his chest, whispering over and over that she could not stop it, that she did not want to hurt him. But the more she fought, the more obvious it became. The bond had already begun. Not by choice, not by design, but by the simple truth that she had come to him, that he had stayed, that kindness had taken root where fear should have been. The hours crawled by, each one heavier than the last. The man sat with her near the fire, her body leaning weakly against his as exhaustion dulled her tremors for a time. Her glowing eyes half closed, her voice soft and broken, she whispered fragments of her past, memories of her people, of how they endured the cycle with rituals, how families protected their own, how she had fled because she could not bear the chains of tradition. Her words faded into silence, and he realized she had chosen his house not by chance but because she had wanted freedom, even if it meant death. As dawn approached, her body stiffened again, her glowing patterns flaring brighter than ever. She gasped, her voice sharp with panic, whispering, "It's stronger now. I can't hold it." He steadied her quickly, his hands gripping her shoulders, his eyes locking on hers. "Then I'll hold it with you," he said firmly. His words broke something in her, her glowing eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling as she whispered, "You don't understand what that means." But even as she warned him, even as fear consumed her, she did not pull away. The unwanted bond had already formed, wrapping around them both like chains neither could escape. And in the heavy silence of that breaking dawn, the man understood one truth. Whatever her season demanded, whatever danger awaited, they would face it together, and the cost would be unlike anything he had ever imagined. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, but the new day brought no peace to the small house. Light filtered through the thin curtains, but inside the air was still thick, heavy with dread and tension. The alien girl sat curled in the corner, her skin glowing faintly beneath the blanket, her breathing sharp and uneven. The man sat across the room, his body stiff from a night without sleep, his mind racing with the truth she had finally confessed. He could see how weak she had grown, but at the same time he could feel something else rising within her, something stronger, something more dangerous. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched painfully long until the girl finally lifted her head, her glowing eyes filled with both fear and resignation. "It's close," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't hold it back much longer." The man leaned forward, his chest tight, asking her what would happen when it came. She shook her head, pressing her hands to her chest, whispering that she would lose herself completely. Her instincts would take over, her body would obey urges older than reason, and he would be caught in the center of it. She told him again to leave, to lock the door and never look back, because once the season claimed her, she would no longer be able to protect him. He listened, his jaw tightening, but he did not move. Instead, he said softly, "You came here for shelter. I won't abandon you now." His words made her flinch as though they were a blade piercing her heart. Tears welled in her glowing eyes as she shook her head violently. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If you stay, they will come. My kind can sense it. They will smell the change in me, they will follow, and when they find us, they will kill you." The man froze at her words. His pulse quickened, but his expression did not falter. "Then let them come," he said firmly. She stared at him in shock, her lips trembling, her whole body shaking. No one had ever spoken like that to her. No one had ever chosen to face her kind's wrath. She lowered her gaze, whispering, "You don't know what you're saying." But deep inside, she felt something stir, an ache not of instinct but of longing, a fragile piece of hope she had buried long ago. The day crawled forward, and with it, the signs of the breaking point became impossible to ignore. Her glowing patterns pulsed brighter with every passing hour, spreading across her arms, her neck, her face, until her skin looked as though fire lived beneath it. She trembled constantly, unable to keep still, her hands clenching and unclenching, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Sometimes she pressed herself against the wall, whispering frantically to herself in her own language, fighting desperately against urges that clawed at her body. Other times she would stare at him with glowing eyes full of hunger and sorrow, then turn away sharply, ashamed. The man stayed close, always near enough to catch her when she faltered, but always respecting the fragile line she drew. Still, the line grew thinner with each moment. At dusk, as shadows lengthened across the floor, the air changed again. A strange sound echoed outside, low, distant, but sharp enough to make her stiffen instantly. Her glowing eyes widened in terror, and she whispered, "They've found me." The man stood, his muscles tightening, scanning the window. The sound came again, closer this time, a call unlike any human voice, carried by the wind. She clutched his sleeve suddenly, her hand trembling against him, whispering that it was her kind. They had tracked her, drawn by the scent of her cycle, drawn by the bond she had formed with him. Her tears fell as she begged him again to run. "If they see you with me, they will tear you apart." He placed his hand over hers, steadying her trembling grip. "I'm not running," he said quietly. "I won't let them take you." She shook her head violently, her glowing eyes blazing with fear. "You can't fight them," she whispered. "They are stronger, faster. You're only human. You'll die." His voice grew firmer, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Then I'll die protecting you." Her breath caught, her tears flowing faster now. She wanted to scream at him for his foolishness, wanted to push him away to keep him safe, but her body betrayed her. She leaned closer, pressing her forehead against his chest, trembling as she whispered, "Why? Why would you do this for me?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you asked for shelter. Because you're more than what they say you are. Because you deserve to be saved." Before she could respond, the sound outside grew louder, closer, until heavy footsteps crunched against the wet earth surrounding the house. The floor seemed to vibrate under the weight of their approach. Shadows moved past the window, tall and unnatural, their glowing eyes shining faintly in the fading light. The girl stiffened, clutching the man's shirt tightly, her whole body shaking as she whispered, "It's too late." The first knock came, sharp and heavy against the door, rattling the frame. The man stepped in front of her instinctively, his body tense, though he had no weapon, no plan. Another knock came, harder this time, followed by a voice, low, guttural, filled with menace, speaking in a language he could not understand but she could. Her face turned pale, her glowing eyes wide with dread. "They are demanding me," she whispered. "They know I'm here. If you open that door, they'll kill you." The man looked at her, his chest tight, his jaw firm. "Then I won't open it," he said. But even as he spoke, the pounding on the door grew louder, more violent, until the wood cracked under the force. She cried out, pulling at his arm, begging him to move aside. "You don't understand. If they break through, they'll take me, and they'll tear you to pieces just to prove a point." He turned to her then, his voice low but unyielding. "Let them try." The door shuddered violently, the hinges groaning, and the house seemed to shake with each blow. She pressed herself against him, torn between fear and awe, whispering his name like a prayer. Her body burned hotter now, the cycle raging inside her, the bond between them pulling tighter than ever. She knew the breaking point had come, not only for her body, but for both of them. And as the door cracked under the weight of her kind's assault, she realized the truth she had been running from. She no longer feared herself as much as she feared losing him. The pounding on the door grew louder, each strike rattling the frame, each echo rolling through the small house like thunder. Dust fell from the beams above, the lantern flame trembled, and the man knew the barrier would not last much longer. The alien girl clung to him, her glowing eyes wide with terror, her skin burning hotter than ever. She whispered over and over that he needed to leave, that if he stayed he would be killed when the door gave way. But he stood firm, his hand pressed gently against her trembling shoulder, his gaze locked on the splintering wood as though he could will it to hold. The voices outside grew sharper, guttural and cruel, a chorus of her kind demanding that she return to them, that she fulfill the cycle. She understood every word, and each one made her flinch. She whispered the translations to him in a trembling voice. "They know I've bonded with you. They say you've tainted me. They say you'll die for it." Her chest heaved with despair, her glowing eyes filling with tears. She pressed her forehead against his chest and sobbed, whispering, "Please, just go. Let them take me. If you fight, you'll lose everything." But he cupped her face with trembling hands, forcing her to look at him. His voice was rough but steady as he whispered, "I already lost everything before you came here. I won't lose you too." His words struck her harder than the blows at the door, breaking something inside her. Her tears spilled faster, her body shivering as though torn between two worlds, the instincts of her kind pulling her one way, the fragile bond she had formed with him pulling the other. The wood finally gave way with a deafening crack. The door splintered inward, and three tall figures stepped through, their forms sharp and unnatural, their glowing eyes burning brighter than hers. Their bodies shimmered with the same living patterns, but where hers glowed faint and fragile, theirs pulsed with power. They looked at her first, their expressions filled with disdain, then at him, their eyes narrowing in fury. One stepped forward, speaking words in their tongue, the meaning clear even before she whispered it. The human dies tonight. The girl staggered to her feet, her body trembling violently, her skin glowing brighter as the cycle raged within her. She placed herself between the man and her kind, her arms spread, her voice cracking as she shouted in their language. The words poured from her like fire, defiant and desperate, telling them he was hers to protect, telling them she would not let them touch him. The three figures laughed, their voices harsh, mocking. They told her she was already lost, that the bond had corrupted her, that the only way to fix it was to destroy them both. The man stepped forward then, standing at her side. He had no weapon, no strength to match them, but he stood anyway, his body shaking but his gaze unyielding. He whispered to her softly, "We face them together." She turned her head, staring at him in shock, her glowing eyes filled with both terror and awe. For a heartbeat, her instincts screamed at her to push him away, to shield him from the fire building inside her. But for the first time in her life, she chose not to listen. The three figures lunged forward. Shadows filled the room, the air thick with heat and power. She cried out, her body arching as the cycle's energy tore through her veins, forcing itself to the surface. She clutched her chest, screaming in pain, her glowing patterns flaring until her skin looked like molten light. The man caught her before she fell, holding her tightly as she gasped, whispering that she could not control it anymore. Her glowing eyes locked on his, tears spilling freely, and she whispered the words that would change everything. Make the choice. End this. Save yourself, or save me. His heart pounded, his mind spinning. He could see the figures advancing, their glowing eyes burning with rage. He could feel her body trembling violently in his arms, the heat of her cycle consuming her. He knew that if he let her go, they would take her and leave him broken. He knew that if he chose her, he would face a fight he could never win. Yet in that moment, the decision came easily. He pulled her closer, his voice steady despite the chaos, and whispered, "I choose you." Her glowing eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. Then she cried out, her body exploding with light so bright it blinded the room. The figures roared in fury, stumbling back as the glow consumed everything. The man held her tightly, his body shaking as the heat seared his skin, but he did not let go. The house trembled as though it would collapse, the air filled with screams and light. When the glow finally faded, silence fell. The three figures were gone, vanished into ash and shadow. The house was scarred, the walls cracked, the floor scorched. The man opened his eyes slowly, his chest burning with each breath, and looked down at the girl in his arms. Her glowing patterns had dimmed, fading into nothing. Her eyes fluttered open, no longer burning but soft, human, filled with tears. She smiled faintly, whispering in a voice so fragile it broke him, "You chose me, and now I'm free." He held her close, his body trembling with exhaustion, his eyes wet with relief. The storm outside had ended, the voices were gone, and the danger had passed. But the bond between them remained, stronger than ever, forged in fire and choice. The final gift was not survival, not freedom. It was love, fragile and forbidden, born in the heart of a man who had given shelter and a girl who had once only wanted to be safe. And as dawn broke, filling the ruined house with light, they both knew nothing would ever be the same again.